As I sit here now, in the quiet of my adult life, I can't help but reflect on those days from my childhood that seem to fade in and out like half-remembered dreams. The forest, Ohio's vast wilderness, still lingers in my mind like a shadow that won't quite leave. I can almost smell the rich, earthy scent of the damp trees, feel the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, and hear the constant hum of cicadas in the summer air. It was a place that felt like home, not because of anything we built there, but because it belonged to us. To me and my best friend, Joe. It didn't matter what was going on beyond the forest, outside those thick green walls. As far as we were concerned, the world ended at the edge of the woods, and we were invincible in there. Joe was always the daring one, the one who constantly pushed us further, daring us to explore deeper parts of the forest we had never ventured into. I followed him without question, trusting him in a way only a child can. We were inseparable in those woods. It was there that we made our mark, created secret spots and hidden shelters of branches and leaves. We pretended we were survivors in a world that had long since ended. We had traps set up for invisible enemies, our little battlefields, and on occasion, we'd pause to eat our canned food, cold and unappetizing, but shared between us on the dirt ground as the sunlight poured down from above. Those woods felt endless. We thought we knew every inch of it, every twist, every hidden path, every turn we'd made 100 times before. It was more than just a place we walked through. It felt like we were a part of it, like it had accepted us, embraced us. The trees seemed to speak to each other on the wind, their leaves rustling like they were gossiping in a language only they understood. We thought we knew everything about that forest. It was ours to conquer, ours to explore. We were like kings there, ruling over a kingdom that no one else could touch. But life, as it always does, has a way of showing you the truths you aren't ready to hear. I've learned since then that forests like the one we played in, ones that feel alive in ways we can't quite explain, have stories of their own. They hold memories, dark and old, that we are far too young to understand. And sometimes, it's only when we're far from the place that we begin to see the shadows, the things we missed when we were too caught up in the thrill of exploring. We begin to see the things that were always there, watching us, waiting. Back then, though, the forest was nothing but a playground, a blank canvas for our childish imaginations. We were invincible, protected by our belief in the goodness of the world, by the promise that nothing bad could happen as long as we were together. But if I'm being honest with myself, I'll admit that, even then, there was always a part of me that felt like the forest was watching us, waiting. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when I'd look up at the trees and feel like they were aware of our presence, acknowledging us in a way that made the hair on my neck stand on end. But I never said anything to Joe. He would have laughed it off, made fun of me for being scared. Still, the feeling lingered, a quiet, unsettling thought that gnawed at me in the background, telling me the forest was more than just a backdrop for our adventures. Then, one summer afternoon, we found the railroad tracks. Joe and I had spent so many hours in those woods, we'd practically mapped out every inch of it in our minds. We knew the places to hide, the best spots to build our forts, the exact locations where we could get the best view of the sunset. We'd even started to create our own myths, legends, and stories about the woods. Joe was the one who would say he heard voices at night, hidden in the shadows, whispering secrets to him. He claimed the forest came alive in the dark, that it had memories, feelings, and dreams of its own. I always rolled my eyes when he said that. I'd pretend I wasn't scared, that I was too tough to believe in any of that. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder. Maybe Joe was right. It was just another hot, lazy afternoon when we wandered farther than we ever had before. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, when we stumbled upon something we hadn't expected. Railroad tracks, rusted and old, cutting through the thick underbrush like a forgotten artery in the forest's heart. It was like discovering a hidden passage to another world, a secret door that had been sealed away for years. The tracks were covered in grime and moss, the wood weathered and rotting in places, but there was something oddly mesmerizing about them. They stretched out before us, leading into the unknown. Something about them was calling to us, pulling us forward, and we couldn't resist. Joe was the first to speak. "Come on, we've got to see where this leads," he said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. His voice was full of that familiar daring energy. I hesitated for a moment, unsure. There was something off about it. It felt like the forest itself had placed those tracks there, like it wanted us to follow them. But I couldn't say no. We'd always done this together, and what was one more adventure? We walked along the tracks for hours, deeper and deeper into the woods. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, faded away. The silence began to settle around us, thick and heavy, like the air itself was pressing down. The trees above seemed to grow taller, their branches intertwining and blocking out the sky, leaving us in a shadowy twilight. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting strange, distorted shapes on the ground that made the forest seem alive, as though it were breathing with us. My unease grew with every step we took, but Joe was oblivious, marching ahead, his confidence unwavering. We stopped occasionally to rest. Each time we did, I felt something odd in the air. It was like the forest had changed. The atmosphere felt thicker, heavier, and every time I turned around, I swore I could see something moving in the shadows. A flicker of movement just beyond my line of sight. It felt like we weren't alone. I heard faint sounds scratching, like claws on the wooden tracks, and distant thumps, as if something heavy was being dragged across the ground. My eyes darted over my shoulder, but each time, there was nothing there, just the vast, quiet woods. Yet the feeling never went away. We pushed forward, determined to find out where the tracks led, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being pulled deeper into the heart of the forest, into something it didn't want us to see. The sun was beginning to set, and the forest grew darker, colder. The shadows stretched longer, and the temperature dropped, as if the forest was holding its breath. We were far from home now, so far I couldn't tell which direction we had come from. The tracks stretched on endlessly, winding through the trees like a serpent. I caught a glimpse of something, a shadow, a shape, moving in the distance, just beyond the trees. I stopped, frozen, my heart racing in my chest. I glanced over at Joe, who was still marching ahead without a care in the world. He didn't see it. He never did. I took a step forward, my eyes darting around, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. There was nothing there, just the usual forest. Just the tracks, leading on. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching us, waiting. We kept walking, the tracks leading us deeper into the heart of the woods. But with every step, the forest seemed to grow darker, colder. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding louder in my chest. It was no longer just the forest around us. Something else was there now. Something that wasn't ready to let us leave. I didn't say anything to Joe. What could I say? He would just laugh, and I knew it. So we kept walking along the tracks, each of us lost in our own thoughts, unaware of the danger waiting for us at the end of them. The sound of our footsteps was the only noise breaking the stillness around us, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the fading warmth of the afternoon sun. We hadn't been out here long, but something about this place already felt wrong. The forest around us seemed to close in, thick trees rising on both sides of the tracks like silent watchers. As we moved deeper, I could feel the air growing heavier, the space around us growing quieter. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just the sound of the tracks beneath our feet and the occasional creak of the trees as the wind whispered through them. Joe didn't notice, of course. He was too caught up in the thrill of the adventure. For him, everything was a game. But for me, it was starting to feel like something was off. By the time we reached the abandoned station, the world around us had shifted completely. The oppressive silence had grown louder, heavier, like something was about to happen. The sun was dipping low behind the trees, casting long, distorted shadows across the tracks. The fading light gave the place an eerie glow, and I felt a chill run down my spine as we approached the dilapidated station. The buildings that lined it looked like they had been forgotten by time itself, abandoned and left to decay in the heart of the woods. The station's walls were covered in thick ivy, the windows shattered, and the ground was covered in broken glass and debris. The once strong structure seemed to be crumbling, slowly fading away, like the forest itself was swallowing it whole. I could feel the weight of its history, of its decay. Something about this place didn't sit right with me, like it held secrets I wasn't meant to know. But Joe, as usual, was already hopping up onto the platform, grinning ear to ear. "Isn't this awesome?" he said, his voice echoing through the dead air. He didn't even seem to notice the way the place felt heavy, watching. His excitement was palpable, and I tried to match it, but it was hard. I wanted to tell him to be careful, to turn back, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded weakly and followed him inside. As we stepped into the station, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't just dust and decay, but something more, something stale, like it had been trapped here for years, gathering in the corners. The air was thick and dry, and the floor beneath our feet creaked and groaned as if it was alive. I could feel the weight of every step I took, like the building itself was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The wood in some places was so rotten it looked like it would crumble under our weight. I felt like we were trespassing in a place that didn't want visitors. Joe, on the other hand, was in his element. He was poking around like he owned the place, flipping over old pieces of scrap metal, kicking aside debris, and looking in corners as if there might be treasure hidden there. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind screaming for me to turn back, but my feet wouldn't move. Every instinct I had was telling me this wasn't right. This place was wrong, and we should have never come here. But I stayed, because Joe was already inside, already exploring. The deeper we went into the station, the more the place seemed to change. The silence grew thicker, pressing down on me, and the air turned colder, like it was holding its breath. My eyes kept darting around the room, taking in the cracked walls, the rusted machinery, the old furniture covered in layers of dust. Everything about the place screamed abandonment. But there was something else, something darker, that made my skin crawl. "Come on, it's not that bad," Joe called from deeper inside, his voice barely cutting through the silence. He didn't understand. He couldn't feel what I was feeling, the sense of dread hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I tried to push the feeling away, but it wouldn't leave. I wanted to call out to him, tell him we should go, but I didn't. I just kept walking, my feet dragging behind me, reluctant to go any further. It wasn't until we reached the back of the station that I saw it, the shadow. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker at the edge of my vision, a movement too quick to catch. But then I saw it again. This time, it was clearer, standing just beyond a broken window. A dark figure, large and unnatural, moving like it was part of the night itself. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real, and it was watching us. I froze. My heart leaped into my throat, and I couldn't breathe. My eyes locked on the shadow, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was too big to be an animal, too wrong to be human. It was like it wasn't even from this world. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. All I could do was stare at it, frozen in place, my mind scrambling for a way to explain what I was seeing. "Joe," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "Joe, get out here." But Joe didn't hear me. Or maybe he just didn't care. He was too busy rifling through some old junk in the corner, completely unaware of the thing standing just outside the window, watching us. My pulse raced, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to get out of there. But I couldn't leave Joe, not without him knowing what I'd seen. But what if it was too late? Then, the air around us grew colder, sharper, like the temperature had dropped suddenly. I shivered, but it wasn't just the cold, it was something deeper, something inside me telling me to get out, to run far away from this place. I opened my mouth to call out again, but before I could make a sound, there was a loud thud from deeper inside the building, followed by a strange dragging sound, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. My heart stopped. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck, and every hair on my body stood on end. The thing outside the window was still there, but now there was something else in the building. Something close. Something alive. I didn't wait. I turned and ran toward the door, my feet stumbling over the debris on the floor. But just as I reached for the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, the sound echoing through the empty station like a gunshot. I froze, my hand still on the door handle, my mind racing. I screamed Joe's name, banging on the door with all my strength, but there was no answer. No sound from the other side, only silence. I don't know how long I stood there, pressing my ear to the door, praying for some sign that Joe was still on the other side, that he hadn't been taken. But there was nothing. The forest outside seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, like it was closing in on me. The trees bent in strange ways, their shadows stretching unnaturally long, twisting like they were reaching for me. I backed away from the door, panic rising in my chest. I had to find Joe. He couldn't be gone. He couldn't be. In a frenzy, I wrenched the door open, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get a grip. The room beyond was empty. Not a single trace of Joe. No footsteps in the dust, no broken pieces of debris where he might have fallen. Nothing. It was as if he had never been there at all. I called out his name, but my voice was hollow, swallowed up by the vast, suffocating silence that surrounded me. I ran from one room to the next, searching through the station, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no sign of him, no answers. I finally stumbled back outside, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. The tracks were still there, stretching off into the distance, but the forest had swallowed everything around them. I stood on the platform, my eyes scanning the darkness, hoping for any sign of him. But the forest had taken him. It had claimed him, and now it mocked my every step, twisting and turning, leading me in circles. When I came back to Ohio years later, the tracks were gone. The forest had reclaimed them, as if they had never existed at all. I searched the area again, but there was no sign of the station, no trace of the place we had been. It was as if it had never been there. But I know the truth now. Some places Some places aren't meant to be found again. I don't know the answers. But if you think you've had a brush with something sinister, or if you've ever experienced a moment where you felt like you were being watched, don't keep it to yourself. Share your story with me in the comments below. And if you want to hear more terrifying tales, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. You never know when the next story will be about you. Stay safe out there. And remember, not everything you see is what it seems.